Tonight, Shirley Ilu Nishmat Avi Marido Ber Mered Ruven Halevi Imi Marati Rachel Bat Harav Michael. And this Shabbos we have the privilege of finishing Sefer Bamidbar. We will be reading two parshiot, Matot and Mas'say, which have a lot of different topics in them. Tonight we're going to talk about the mitzvah of how we, or the I shouldn't say this, the procedure for how we prepare utensils that were not made by us for use in a kosher home, I guess would be the proper proper word. We're going to start with, hold on a sec. We are in chapter Lamed Aleph, which, by the way, describes the war with Midian. Okay. And we're talking about what happens when all of the soldiers come back from the war with Midian. So we're in chapter 31. We're in Pasuk Yud Gimel, and we're going to be focusing really on the Psukim Chaf Aleph through Chaf Daled. But I wanted to give a little background by beginning with the story of when the soldiers come back. So it says, "Vayetzu Moshe ve'Elazar HaKohen v'chol Nesiei ha'Edah likrotam." Moshe and Elazar, because Aaron is no longer around, who is the Kohen Gadol, and all of the Nesiim go out to greet or to meet the soldiers El michutz lamachaneh, outside the camp of Am Yisrael. Vayitzof Moshe al Pikudei Chol. Moshe gets upset on the officers of this unit that was sent to fight against Midian. Sarei alafim v'sarei me'ot, the officers of thousands, the officers of hundreds, haba'im mitzvah hamilchama, who were coming from the army that went out to fight. Vayomer lehem Moshe, Moshe said to them, Hachitem kol nikeva, did you leave all the women alive? And then he explained, I'm going to skip Tet Zayin to Yud Zayin and Yud Chet because I want to go to Yud Tet, which is where what I really was going to quote. But he basically complains that the women who were the ones who caused Am Yisrael to sin weren't punished for leading Am Yisrael astray. And then he says, "V'atem, and you, all of you, the soldiers, you have to stay outside the camp for 7 days. Kol horeg nefesh, anybody who killed somebody, and anybody who came in contact with a corpse, titchatu, you have to be sprinkled with the water from the paraduma bayom hashlishi bayom hashvi'i, on both the third day and the seventh day. Atem you ushvichem, and any captives that you have captured. V'chol beged v'chol klior, and any garment or any leather item. Chomasei izim, anything that is made from goat skin. V'chol kli'etz, and anything that is a wooden utensil. Titchata'u, has to also be immersed or sprinkled or something. So we'll get to that in a second. Now, in verse 21 says the following: Elazar tells all of the soldiers, Haba'im lamilchama. Now, there's a very strange phraseology that are coming to the war, where it should have said they're coming from the war because they've already finished the war. But the first will discuss that. I hope we'll get to it. Zod chukat haTorah. This is a law of the Torah. Shitziva Hashem et Moshe. That Hashem commands Moshe. Ach et hazahav et hakesef, gold and silver. Nechosh et habarzel, copper or brass and iron. Et habedil vet hofaret, anything made of tin or lead. Kol davar asher yavo ba'esh, anything that is used in the fire. Taviru ba'esh, has to be passed through fire v'toher, and then it will become pure. Ach, however, but b'meini da yitchata, through the waters of purification, it has to be purified. V'chol asher lo yavo ba'esh, and anything that does not enter into fire, taviru b'mayim, has to be passed through water. We're going to try to understand what all of this means as we go through the parshanim on this. The chibas tembik dechem, and you soldiers should change your garments. Vayom hashvi, on the seventh day, utartem, and you will become pure. And only then, only after you've gone through this purification process, can you re-enter the camp and return to your normal homes and lives, etc. So again, the question here is this whole chapter that Elazar is telling the soldiers, what is the intent? What are the mitzvot that we are supposed to learn here, both for that generation as well as for future generations in terms of taking items that were owned by non-Jews and preparing them to be used by Jews. That's the concept that we're going to try to deal with here. So firstly, Rashi says, it's interesting because this chapter is introduced by Yomer Elazar going that Elazar is the one who is teaching this law to Am Yisrael. And normally, we know that Aaron doesn't teach laws, so why is Elazar suddenly teaching Am Yisrael laws? Normally, it should have said, Vayomer Moshe. Moshe should have taught this law. Lefi sheba Moshe liklal kas. Since Moshe got upset, it says, we saw before Moshe got upset at the officers for allowing all of the women who had led Am Yisrael astray to stay alive. So Moshe was upset. Therefore, Bali Klal Ta'ud, he forgot the law. He forgot the laws of how we take items that were purchased or that were obtained from Goyim and prepare them for use in a Jewish home. Similarly, we find on the 8th day of the Miluim that Moshe got angry. When Moshe gets upset, he doesn't remember the law clearly, and there Aaron very politely corrects him, as we saw in Parshat Shmini. And similarly, Rashi says that he got angry at the people at Mei Merivah, and that was also another reason why he made a mistake through anger. So Rashi basically wants us to understand, don't get angry and don't make decisions when you're angry because you don't have all your wits about it. Because even somebody as great as Moshe, when he got upset, he forgot certain things or didn't remember certain things. Nonetheless, Elazar HaKohen tells the people, Asher Tziva Hashem et Moshe, this is the law that Hashem has commanded Moshe. And again, Tala ha'hora berabo. So Elazar doesn't say Hashem spoke to me, so people shouldn't think that Hashem spoke to him. He says that Hashem has commanded this to Moshe, and he gives the proper credit and the proper respect that Moshe is the one who taught this halacha. I'm just repeating it because right now he's not in position to repeat it. So that's Rashi's interpretation of this pasuk. Now, the pasuk says, Zahav Kesef. These are, by the way, all those items that were mentioned were all metals. Gold, silver, copper, iron, tin, lead, all metals. Af al pi shelo hizu lachem Moshe elo al hilchot tumah. Moshe in the previous chapter told them that to remove any tumah, because any of these vessels were in contact with a dead body, they have to be sprinkled with the ashes of the water mixed with ashes from the parah adumah to free them of the impurity of being in contact with the dead body. However, od yesh lahazir lachem al hilchut giul. You also have to be told. Elazar is telling you. We also have to understand that there's a second procedure they have to go through that has nothing to do with whether they've been in contact with a dead body or not, and that is the law of purging any representation, anything that is because of their non-Jewish ownership. We have to prepare it a second way before it can be used. And that this va'ach is lashon miut. The word ach means but, and it's to exclude something. Kilomar, as if to say, M'muatin atemi lishtamesh b'kelim afil le'achar taraton mitumat hamet. That you are excluded from being able to use these utensils even after they have become purified from impurity in contact with the dead. Ad sheyitaharu mibliat isur nevelot. Until they have been purified from any absorbed non-kosher food. Isur nevelot literally means food of animals that was not shechted properly. So any time that a utensil absorbs from a non-kosher source, it has to be koshered first before it can be used. V'rabotenu amru, and the Chazal tells Achad hazahav. This refers only to this pasuk, Lomar, to teach us shetzarich lavir chaluda shelo kodem shigolenu. This ach only comes to tell us that you have to remove any rust or other impurities before you prepare this vessel for being purged and being used with kosher food. And this is what it means, ach, but. Shelo yehi sham chaluda, there should not be any rust or impurity. Ach hamatechet, only the metal. Yeah, kamoshu. You have to strip it down to the bare metal. You have to clean it thoroughly. You have to remove any impurities, any rust, any other corrosion that may have appeared on these utensils before you can use them. So again, anytime you purchase or obtain something from a non-Jewish source, even if they claim, oh, no, we never used it with non-kosher food, it doesn't matter. If it comes from a non-kosher source, you have to first thoroughly clean it and make sure that it's only the metal, and then you can proceed. Now, how do we do that? What's the next thing that we have to do after we clean it? Kol davar asher yavo ba'esh. Anything that enters into in fire. Okay, so anything that is used directly on a flame. Hold on a second. I apologize for a minute. Kol davar asher yavo ba'esh levashel bo klum. Anything that is put on a fire to use in a cooking process, a pot, a pan, kaviru ba'esh has to be passed through fire. Kederach tashmisho hagalato. The way we purge the non-kosher residue or anything that has been absorbed from the item is the same way it was used. So tashmisho al yidei chamin, whatever is used directly with fire, yigalenu b'chamin, has to be purged through being placed directly on a fire. And that which is used through roasting, kigon hashipud, the askalok, for example, a spit or a grating that is put directly on the fire and then the food is put directly on the grating, yivlalenu, or has to be literally burned by fire. In other words, you have to take a blowtorch to it. If it's a spit or it is a grating that is put directly on the fire and the food is placed directly on it, because it gets the heat, a direct heat. Therefore, the only way to remove anything that's been absorbed is through direct heat. However, it also has to pass through the procedure of mei nidah. And now we have two different opinions. Lefip shuta, Rashi says the simple explanation of mei nidah. This is referring to being sprinkled with the waters of the ashes of the paraduma to purify this from the fact that it was in contact with a dead body. Amar lahem. So Elazar is explaining to them. First, they have to be purged. They have to be kashered to remove any absorbed flavor. And then it needs a purification to remove the tuma. However, Rabotenu Darshunikan, but the Chazal interpreted Sha'af lachshiron min ha'isor hitu tvila l'chli matachot. Even after you have removed them by purging them in fire, it still requires tvila. It still has to go into a mikvah for any metal utensil. Any metal utensil that is obtained from a non-Jewish source, even if it's new, we'll see later on, requires immersion in a mikvah before we use it. Umei nidah tuvim kan, and the fact that it uses the phrase mei nidah, which can sometimes mean, as Rashi saw, the water of the paraduma, the water mixed with ashes of the paraduma. Nonetheless, Darshu, the Chazal explained that the fact that it uses the term mei nidah means mayim haru'uyim litfol behem nidah. It means waters that are suitable for a woman who has nidah to immerse herself in before she comes permitted to her husband again. The kamohen arboim son, how much is that? That's 40 sa, which is the minimum shiur of a mikvah. So they have to, after they have been kashered, they need to go through a mikvah. V'chol asher lo yavo ba'esh, anything that is not used with heat. So what does that mean? Kol davar she'ein tashmish al yidei ha'or, anything that is not used with fire, kigon, for example, kosot, drinking cups, or wine drinking cups, or tzeluchiot, flasks that hold beverages, Shetashmishan bitzonen, which are generally used with cold beverages or cold items. The low balu isur, therefore they have not absorbed any non-permitted flavor to the same extent that things that go on the fire will have absorbed them. What do they do with them? Taviru b'mayim. You just have to pass them through water. Matbilan. We immerse them in a mikvah v'dayo, and that's enough. V'davka klematachot. This is specifically talking about metal utensils. So all of these things that has to go into a mikvah is primarily metal utensils, is what we're talking about according to Rashi. Now Rashbam says differently. He says, Ach b'mei nida. The fact that it says mei nida is the mei nida shel parah aduma. The water mixed with the ashes of the parah aduma, l'tara mitumat nefesh, again to purify them from the fact they've been in contact with a dead body. Ush'ar divarim, all the other things that are talked about in this parak, l'nakota mi'isur machal anivla b'kelim. The other things of passing them through fire or passing them through water, that is to clear them of any attached residue that or any flavor from a non-kosher source that was absorbed into these items. Anything that passes through the fire. And again, same thing we just said. Anything that is used through fire. Shipud, a spit, the askala, or a grate, as we saw before. Sarich libun ba'esh k'dil hagil. It requires heating with a fire in order to purge it of any non-kosher flavor or non-kosher absorption. The tamo, the loma masho de oraita. Now, this is a principle in kashrut. Something that leaves a flavor but does not leave any exact residue. It only all that's absorbed is the flavor from this item. Nonetheless, the fact that that is forbidden, if it is a flavor from a non-kosher source, that is a Torah law that's forbidden. That utensil that has absorbed just the flavor, it hasn't absorbed any specific, any concrete item except the flavor, that's enough to forbid it. What has to go into, it has to have mei nida, waters of nida upon it. Shetzarich tevila, it requires going into the mikvah. Vafilu hu tahor, even if it has not come in contact with the dead body, it still has, or any other source of tumah, it still has to go into the mikvah. Vafilu hu chadash, even if it's a new item that was just made by this non-Jew and he's transferred ownership to you, it requires going in the mikvah. But you have to take the item, bring it into a mikvah before you use it. Metal utensils that are purchased from a goy, require immersion in a mikvah. Because it's referring specifically to metal items, because we see all of the items listed in this verse are zav, kesef, dilo, faret, are all metals. Kidis Vodazar, as the Gemara in Vodazar explains this pasuk. However, vasher nitmeu b'meit, those items that also touched a dead body, they also, in addition to going into a mikvah or being kosher, they also require sprinkling with the ashes of the parah aduma on the third day and the seventh day, and then they require going into the mikvah. All of that is to purge them of the tumat mei. Anything that is not used with fire, taviru b'mayim, you have to pass through water. Im tashmisho b'chamin, if it's used with hot beverages or hot food, tzarich lagilo b'chamin, you have to rinse it thoroughly with hot water. So, for example, if it's a plate that the hot food is put on, or it is a cup that we have hot beverages in, they require thorough washing with hot water. But if we only use them with cold foods, your salad plate, or a cold cup, a cold beverage cup holder, it's enough to just rinse it thoroughly. The kivolo kach polto, because we have this general principle in terms of removing flavor from something. The same method that was used for it to absorb is the same way we have to unabsorb we have to remove the absorption from this item. Now, in reality, this is Chizkuni, right? No, this is the Kosher adds one other minor detail here, that in reality, from a strict perspective, it's only utensils that were used the same day that you bought, that you obtained possession from a guy the same day it was used with non-kosher food. That's when, from a Torah perspective, we require you had to purge it, because in that case, if the flavor has been absorbed within the past 24 hours, it is still there. Shalonifkam tamam, and it will add a beneficial flavor. After 24 hours, it adds a negative flavor, but it's only a rabbinic requirement after the first 24 hours, because we don't want people to think that it's okay to immediately use something that we got from a non-kosher source. And that's why we add this. It's a rabbinic, but from a Torah perspective, if this requirement only is on the first day, because that's when if it is absorbed flavor and you put it back and heat something in it, it will release that flavor in a favorable way to the food that you're cooking. Please, Kuni. Okay. Chizkuni also wants to know, why is Elazar the one teaching this halacha? Since the person who was responsible for offering and preparing the para aduma was Elazar HaKohen, as we saw in Parashat Chukat, Pirshahu li Yisrael. He is the one who explains this requirement to Am Yisrael. However, he wasn't supposed to. In reality, Moshe is the one who was supposed to teach us halacha. Since he taught this halacha in the presence of Moshe, his teacher, even though he taught it in the name of Moshe, ne'nash, he was punished. What was this? His punishment? Because Hashem told Moshe when he appointed Elazar, when he appointed Yoshua, he said, Elazar Kohen Yamod. He will always go to Elazar if he has any important questions. Yet we never find Yoshua going to Elazar to seek his advice, to ask him a question of the Urim and Tumim or anything. So it seems that Chizkuni wants to say that this was a punishment for Elazar for teaching this halacha in the presence of Moshe Rabbeinu. Again, wants to teach us the importance that we have to give respect to our teachers and we shouldn't be teaching in their presence. Zot Chukat Torah. Why is it Chukat Torah? Kolomar Mar she'amar lachem Moshe kol horeg nefesh v'gomer. The fact Elazar is saying that he's repeating this phrase of Zot Chukat Torah is really the chukah is not this purging kalim. It's the whole concept of the para aduma and removing tuma from a corpse from you. Hein mitzvot amort b'parshat para aduma. These are the same that Moshe just taught you. Is the same thing we already learned in Parashat Chukat, that there's a law of if something comes in contact with a dead body, it has to have the waters for the para aduma sprinkled upon it. V'taher, and it will become pure. It has to go to a mikvah. Amar Rabba Baravoy. Rabba Baravoy says, Afilu kalim chadashim, as we saw above. Even if I have a new item that I bought from a guy, it still has to be go through the mikvah. Ki de'itza v'Yerushalmi d'sof avodat kochavim. Ata ha'uvda kamei Rav Yirmiyah. The question came before Rav Yirmiyah, and Amar tzorich shel lahatbil. He says it still requires tefillah even if it's new. Lama, why? Because this item, which was previously owned by a non-Jew, is now entering a Jewish home. And that's why it has to go in the mikvah. That's the reason for it. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Avua. Now, Rav Nachman says another law in the name of Rabba Bar Avua, that what? Lo shanu, we only learned that an item requires immersion in a mikvah, ela bilekuchin, shenechletu b'yad Yisrael, only if it's been purchased and it has now found a permanent home in the hand of the Jew. Ukamasa shahaya b'midyan, And as we saw in the case of the war with Midian, that they now moved into undisputed possession of the Jewish people, the Jewish owners. If I borrow a item from a non-Jew, I do not require it to go in the mikvah. And it does not require it. Okay. Now we go to another question. If I have utensils of chunya, of this type of coated ceramic, glazed ceramic, that are the undersource is ceramic and they're covered with a lead type coating. But they're only used with cold. And I bought it from a non-Jew. Butter sofa nazlinon, we go through what the outer coating is, because the final stage in the process is its metal. So this also requires tefillah, immersion in the mikveh, because the outer coating, the outer layer, is metal. Okay, this is mashkanta. What if? Now we said if I own it, if I buy it, and it's a full sale, then I have to immerse it. If it's a loan, I don't have to. If I'm just borrowing it, I don't have to. Now he asked the following question: what if it's a mashkanta? What if a non-Jew gave me a pledge? He gave me a cup as a pledge, and I want to use the cup. Do I have to bring it to mikveh or not? Amar Marbar Ashi said, Abba Mashken Le Kanani Kasa de Kaspa. He quotes a story. My father was given a silver cup by a guy as a pledge, the Atbale, and he then immersed it in a mikvah, Vishati Bey, and he then drank from it. The Lo Yadana, but I'm not sure if it's Imishum de Kasavar Mashkana Kizvine Damya. If I thought that if the halacha really is that when a non-Jew gives me a pledge, it's as if he's sold it to me. Or if here in this case he knew that the guy gave him this as a payment and had no intention of paying the loan back, and that's why he gave him the cup, which was worth the loan. That's what it was learned. And so he didn't answer. The Gemara doesn't answer the question of what happens when he gives it as a pledge. We don't have an answer to that. But clearly, if you borrow something from a non-Jew that is new, you don't have to bring it to the mikvah. Obviously, if it's something the guy has used, you obviously do have to kosher it. Okay. You have to, before you go back, you have to change your begadim. Dugma the chibsusim losam de parshat yitro. The dugma chibeso sevid part begodav. They clearly had to change their garments and not just wash them and go in the mikveh themselves because they had been in contact with the dead, as we see in other places that somebody who is tameh, who wants to re-enter the camp, has to go to a mikveh, even whether there are other procedures involved or not. Okay, Dr. Kanan. Now, Dr. Kanan raises an interesting question. This, by the way, this war with Midian is not the first war we've read about that Am Yisrael has fought. We just read about they had a war against Sichon and Og 2 weeks ago. So Tosfos asked the following question. Tema, I have a very interesting question. How come here we now have all this mitzvah of kashering all of the items that they captured as spoils from the Goyim? Why didn't we have that before with the war with Sichon and Og? The Yesh Lomar, and the answer he said Tosfos wants to give is Lafisha Shar Milchamot Hayu B'Sadeh. The other wars were fought on a battlefield. We read that Sichon came out to fight against Am Yisrael and they conquered him. Og came out to fight against Am Yisrael and they conquered him. The Lo Hayusham Klei Tashmishei Bayit. And as a result, the spoils of the war did not include kitchen utensils that they would use for food preparation. Avol Khan, but in this case, the war against Midian, the war was in the cities of Midian. The Shalalu Abatim, and they took spoils from the kitchens, from the houses. Therefore, we have this teaching of the law of purging vessels. That's the Cain's answer. Rosh is going to ask the same question, as we'll see in a minute, and is going to give a different answer. Yesh lahakshos. Again, Rosh has the same exact question. Yesh mefarshim. And now he says he quotes first what the Tosfos says. Okay, he says first. We call Makom Kash. He says I don't like that answer. It's still problematic. The goyim, the people themselves were tamei. Utensils that are touched by a goy, that come in contact with a dead corpse, are tamei, even if the corpse is a non-Jew, because even though we know that in a building, if I'm in the same building as a corpse, as a Jewish corpse, I become tamei meid. If I'm in the same building as a non-Jewish corpse, I don't become tamei meid, because we know that Jews are called Adam and Goyim are not called Adam, as we see in Pesukim in Nevi'im, Etna Tonai Tzomaritai Adam Atem. You are Adam, Am Yisrael is called Adam, and by Utumat Ohel, by the Tumah that comes from being in the same structure as a maid, Adam Ki Yamut Ba'ohel. It says an Adam. So he proves from here that certain types of Tumah Ohel, Tumah of being in the same structure as a corpse, only applies to a Jewish corpse. Nonetheless, nonetheless, when they come in contact, they're still tamei. So why? Okay, why didn't they require to be sprinkled with the ashes of the paraduma and tefillah after the war against Sichon and Og? V'yesh lomar, he says the following: the Milchemet Sichon v'Og, the war against Sichon v'Og, is different than the war against Binyan in the following sense. The war against Sichon and Og ha'isakachat mimilchamot Eretz Yisrael. The wars against Sichon and Og were already part of the conquest of Eretz Yisrael, which tells us that even the land on the East Bank is part of Eretz Yisrael, according to this Perush. Shehutar Yisrael. Now we know that during the wars of conquest of Eretz Yisrael that were fought under Yoshua and here under Moshe, Shehutar Yisrael davar tuma, that things that were ordinarily be tamei were permitted to Am Yisrael. Vafilu katle de chazire, even basically katli means the back of the neck of chazer. If there was in a Goyish house that they conquered during the war of conquest under Yoshua, there was literally chazer, they were still allowed to eat it, even though normally chazer is asur. When this war of conquest, they were allowed. Because we say from the pasuk, it says Moshe tells Am Yisrael in Sefer Dvarim that you are going to come into Eretz Yisrael and you're going to conquer batim melayim kol tuv. You're going to have houses filled with everything that is good. And over Abu Rakan and the Gemara Darshans from this pasuk of kol tuv, everything in the houses is good, is usable. Even something that's literally out now treifa, if you find it in a house that part of the conquest, it's permitted. And just like they were not warned against eating non-kosher food and food that was cooked by goyim that they captured during the wars of conquest, so also they did not have to purify themselves when they became tamei during those wars. The kach mash mitoch perish Rashi, and that seems to be implied by Rashi's commentary on Gabi Achriya Koto et Sichon parshiot Elad Varim. The perish the fikach himtimat shetipol eretz Sichon v'Og lifneihem. Therefore, Moshe waited until the conquest had begun with the conquest of Sichon and Og, and then he told them Arishim et Haaretz, that he told them these halachot. The achar kach hochichan, and then he rebuked Am Yisrael for all that happened during the last 40 years. Avol. So that was all the war against Sichon and Og. That was part of the wars of conquest, during which ordinary laws of kashrut and ordinary laws of tumah do not or did not apply. When it comes to the war against Midian, which is not part of the conquest, they hadn't entered Eretz Yisrael, and no tumah was permitted, and that is why we have all of these laws here in the war against Midian, even though they were not in the war against Sichon and Og. So again, two different ways of looking at why this mitzvah is here and not there. Sforno says that again, when we tire these things, there are two types of tara. One is migiule goyim. One is from the fact that they were used by goyim and they have to be purged of any absorbed taste or any pieces of things that are stuck to the utensils. And then the second is even though I have taken this spit that I got in a non-kosher spit and I've totally burned it with a blowtorch so that I've removed anything, that still doesn't remove the tumah of the fact that it was in contact with a dead body. Libun, even if I heat it till red hot, it doesn't make it. Even though by heating it and removing everything from it, I make it look like it's new. It doesn't remove the tumat made from it, and it still has to go to have the ashes of the paraduma sprinkled on it. So that's what what meinida means. That we shouldn't think that koshering something by heating it white hot makes it removes tumat made from it, removes the impurity of having been in contact with the dead body. So again, all of these halachot of Tara. Now Rambam goes along. It's running late. Let's see how much of the Rambam we can do. Okay. What does it mean that it has to go in fire? Ein hakli shenaga b'meit, any item that came in contact with a dead body, oben vela, or a carcass of an animal that was non-kosher, nitar ba'esh. It cannot be purified by putting it in fire, the way we kosher something. She'ein tevilat haTorah el b'mayim, because when we talk about Tefillah in the Torah, it always talks about going into a mikvah, water. Therefore, Chazal required Lefaresh to explain this purification that is required through passing them through fire is to remove any absorbed taste. And this is absolutely no question. This is the meaning of this verse, that in order to use any of these utensils that were used in non-kosher kitchens, we have to first remove any absorbed taste or obviously any residue that's sticking to the utensil. But anything that does not go in fire, as Rashi explains, as he's quoting, anything that is not used in fire could go in kosot, sluchiot, kitonot, flasks and ladles and cups that are used only with cold items. They have not absorbed any flavor. You have to rinse them thoroughly with water. We dip them in water, and that's enough. That's Rashi's lashon. And Raman says that doesn't make sense to you. This that you should pass it through is not mean tevila, dip it in the mikvah. Ki haya omer taviu b'mayim shu lashon hatfila, would say put it into water, not pass it through water. Come over b'mayim yuva. We have other passages. Mayim yuva, the word that's the verb that is used for entering into a mikvah and exiting a mikvah is taviu, not ta'aviru. The och afa kelim shemishtamshim b'tzonein, and additionally, even utensils that are only used with cold food. They also require to be purged of any isur before you immerse them in the mikvah. And how is it possible that it would not mention the fact that they require some type of hechsher, of preparation, as we saw with the utensils that are used in fire? When the Chazal taught us about this immersion in a mikvah, they didn't quote this pasuk. They used the pasuk not taviu b'mayim, but the word of meinida. Mayim shanida tovelet bahem. Avoperish taviru b'mayim. This explanation of taviru b'mayim, that you pass through water. What does that mean? It means exactly what we think it means. L'chavsam, l'shavshifosam b'mayim yafeh. It's to thoroughly wash them and rub them with water very, very thoroughly. Till any corrosion, rust, residue that might have stuck to them from being used in non-kosher use, that is that was when they were used. And that is how we remove the forbidden eye from it. Yomar Kasub. So therefore, the pasuk is trying to teach us that something that is used with fire has to go through fire in order to be kosher. Or if it's something metal that was used with fire, you have to heat it till it's hot. If it's something that's used only by pouring hot onto it, could go and have a deal of ofaret, tin, and lead, and then he has to just dip it into a pot of hot water. The davar shalonish tamshubo ba'esh, something that's never used with fire, you have to rinse it thoroughly with water until everything is cleansed. That's why we say again, we are here seeing the different development of what we call the laws of koshering items. So as I say, two different processes. One is removal of residue or any absorbed flavor. And the second is removing the impurity per se of attached to being owned by a non-Jew, because now it's going to be owned by a Jew. And that's where the whole source of Tfilat Kalim is. From this war with Mijan, I'm going to stop here because my time is up. But we really see the importance here of basically preparing ourselves to say that it's not enough to just buy something. It's not enough to say if we're buying it from a non-Jew, we're elevating this utensil. It's now going to be used in a Jewish home, in a kosher home, and that itself gives this item greater status. And we should think we should realize from this halakha, if that's the case with inanimate objects, how much more so when we're talking about people and how we relate to people and how we are trying to elevate them by bringing them closer to Torah and Judaism. Thank you all. I open up for questions, comments, and feedback at this time. Anybody? No questions. Okay. Thank you all for joining. Have a good rest of the week. And Laila Tov, Beshem, we'll see you all next week. Again, Laila Tov.
Laila Tov.
Elevating the